All right, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm your host, Dan. Today I'm going to be talking about Mercury in Sagittarius and to some extent the Sagittarius stellium, which I figured I'd record this now because we have this little window of time where we have four planets in Sagittarius, and very shortly Mars will ingress into Capricorn. So we have a little window of time where we have a four planet stellium in Sagittarius. And I figured I might as well take advantage of this because I'm somebody who has a four planet stellium in Sagittarius myself, right? So I'm getting all my Sagittarius placements hit by this transit. And this also includes, of course, the main thing I'm focusing on is Mercury has just ingressed here, and Mercury, of course, is in poor dignity, unfortunately, in Sagittarius, because there's the opposition between Sagittarius and Gemini, Mercury contrasted with Jupiter, and there's something about like the communicating chattiness, the messenger of Mercury versus Sagittarius being a double-bodied sign that it's just difficult territory for Mercury, and it makes I have nonetheless been getting a bit of somebody I haven't talked to recently sent me a link to somebody else's astrology video, some astrologer that I'm completely not familiar with, and it's just sort of interesting, sort of like that maybe that's provoked me a little bit. Um, you also have to keep in mind what's going on is that Mars so we have this little window where Mars is ingressing into Capricorn, and in Capricorn Mars is exalted, and also we basically have this stellium, this cluster of planets, which includes Mars, Sun, and Venus. And if you look at what's happening for the rest of the year, I might do another video about this because it basically goes into January, February, March of next year. But there's going to be this cluster of planets, which are currently in Sagittarius, are basically going to be parading through Capricorn, and then Aquarius, and then Pisces, and then Aries. And as they do this, they're going to be picking up. It's like almost as if it's like a parade strolling through town, and as they go through these signs, they're going to be picking up the other planets and carrying them along with them as they do these motions through the different signs. And right now they're all in Sagittarius. And I've got a lot of Sagittarius placements, so I might as well talk about this from the Sagittarius perspective. Although this is only momentary, mind you. This is pretty soon. They're all going to be in Capricorn. In New Year's, there's going to be, after New Year's, I think it's January 7th, there is going to be a triple conjunction of Venus, Mars, and the Sun in Capricorn. But for now, what we have is we have this huge lineup in a square to Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, right? And one of the things, I don't know, I mean, there's this other guy's video I was watching. I don't disagree with any of it, but there's something about the vibe of I'm not gonna like single anybody out here, but I'm just gonna confess that personally, even though I like making astrology videos, I've been struggling a little bit with the fact that I don't feel like I really vibe with other astrologers or the astrology scene in general. But I'm trying to there's something about this where I feel maybe I can get into this with what I'm trying to say here with the there's first of all what I'd like to point out about all this is that with Saturn and Neptune can often stand for things like a fantasy or a delusion or a the divine yearning. Like you have some kind of like uh, romantic desire, and if you merge with the object of your desire, then you will experience union and harmony and satisfaction or something like that. Or there's some sort of like fantasy, like glamorized ideal that like something that's put on a high pedestal, and that if I can only attain this ideal, then I'll be happy. But the thing is, you've deluded yourself. You are caught in a dream, deluded by an object of your desire or something like that, or that you're trying to like there's a difficulty dealing with reality, so you're running away from reality and all this kind of stuff. And there's something about all this which I have to admit, you have to admit it's kind of ironic, given the if you're making an astrology video, you are basically operating on this prior given. There's this thing you have to agree on in order to like play the game of astrology, which is like, in order to do astrology, we first of all have to basically all agree that astrology is real, and and that so that if you're watching an astrology video, you're in the club of people who like astrology, and so that we're not going to waste any time debating the validity or reality of astrology, and especially if it's like whatever sidereal versus tropical. You see, there's a certain amount of things that just have to be given and accepted to then you get to this point where, and then like for example, are you even going to use the outer planets or whatever, right? All these different like decisions about how you're going to do your divination that are not going to be questioned, and then from there you go and you diagnose the problem as, oh, there's a problem with becoming deluded, right? You're like, I have chosen the system which I'm not going to question at all, and then this gives me special access to certain insights in which I can make prescriptions to give advice to people and tell them what to do. But we're just going to take for granted that this is maybe a niche thing that not everybody believes in. But if you're watching the video, we're going to treat it as if it's just an objectively true, real thing, which I can speak about in a very authoritative, positive way, and then prescribe to different people, to different signs. Okay, now for you, you should do this, you should do that, and I'm the master because I've spent all this time contemplating it, right? This is kind of like, so this kind of thing is like, you have to basically kind of accept the reality of astrology as some inherently real thing and not question that, and then say, okay, given that, we're not going to talk about that. Given all that, we're going to say, watch out for like falling into some sort of delusional belief system that you just take hook, line, and sinker, and you don't question the reality of, and that you think you have sort of magical access to like this whole other level of meaning, but you've just deluded yourself, and then but you're not being critical of the own medium that you do. There's a certain kind of like fourth wall irony, and that there's something about it is like that there's some tension. The problem with this is that if I'm going to be doing astrology, it's not my job to be questioning that, right? You just have to kind of take that as part of the structure of what you're doing and don't question that. But then it's like from that position, then you're like, oh, but look at all these wacky conspiracy people who believe all these silly ideas, or look at all these people, and it's like you're like pointing it all outside, but not doing a self-critique of your own shtick. And then you're also gonna be, oh, and then I'm going to charge you $300 an hour for this thing that's questionably whether it's real or not, and then I'm going to lecture you about how you're going to need a reality check. You're going to need, you're going to have to come to terms with the reality of the situation and ground into the consensus reality, and and grow up basically. And I'm here because I've studied the archetypes and I know all about the Saturn and adulthood. I'm the one who's going to be charging you these huge fees for this sort of thing that could very well be make-believe, right? Now the thing is, I have, in the past, when I was more, let's say, actively collaborating with other astrologers, one of the things that I noticed is that there is this question about, I don't know, ideas like, let's say, simulation theory, or the idea of Maya, or the illusion or something, or the dream. What if life is just a big dream and we're all just dreaming it up, and it's a big imagination process, and that there's a certain process of fantasy that is Have you guys seen the popular movie from a couple years ago, the Barbie movie? Regardless of, I mean, even without getting into the Barbie, there's a lot of going on in the Barbie movie, but there's also the Aqua song where they talk about, imagination, life is your creation, right? Something about, there's something about the premise of what we do when we do astrology is that we regard, I mean, even if without trying to be so hung up on trying to prove that it's like some sort of concretely real thing that we're just going to be, it's like the planets are making everything happen and whether you believe it or not, it's just real, right? There is this other approach where it's like you have a creative, we're all co-creators creating this reality that we participate in, and that the process of contemplating divinatory signs, divinatory omens, and looking at our own grounded life situation, that we have a sort of creative capacity to work with our life circumstances in a creative way, and the taking time to slow down and to contemplate things and to look at things from different angles. Because I think that's the one thing about astrology which is interesting, is that it gives you an archetypal map, and the archetypes have been described as different perspectives by which to look at things, right? And the problem, basically, is that we don't want to be trapped into a kind of a monomania where there's only one way to see things. And by doing astrology, even if you have a limited, if you have a, let's just say 12 signs of the zodiac, that at least is an enormous multiplicity compared to a monomaniacal perspective on life, right? If you only have one perspective on life, if things are only reduced to that way of doing things, then there could be all sorts of options or possibilities that are limited, that you're cut off from, right? And part of this, though, is that there is a question, though, of like whether or not you're living authentically, or whether it's just a big, what happen, what if astrology itself is fake and make believe, basically, and that what if and there's this kind of problem about this, the idea of, like, I'm trying to say is like Barbie dolls, right? Of like, imagine you are like inventing an imaginary world for your Barbie doll playset, and that this, the thing about this is that it gives the child a contained little environment with which to, they are the creator. They get to say what's going on. They get to make the decisions. They get to make the choices. But in the outside world, we may not have that kind of creative control, right? Now, the thing is, there's something about the one of my other hobbies is electronic music. And one of the things that I find that has helped me to keep going with electronic music over the years, despite there's sometimes I get, have you ever had a hobby or a pursuit or something that you're interested in, and you encounter creative blockages, or a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of motivation, a lack of inspiration, and or you question the whole pursuit, whether it's just a waste of time or you're just embarrassing yourself or whatever, right? There's something about electronic music which I keep going with, because it allows me the opportunity to have a certain there's a certain, when you compare this with people who are into the magical practices, there's this thing about drawing the magic circle, where you have a closed off environment in which you have creative control, but you're only operating with, it's also similar to like if you're playing like a game or a sport or something, that like if you have like a team of, if you have a bunch of people get together to play basketball or football or baseball, you all agree upon the rules of the game. And I think you can say divination is kind of like this too, because we're not going to, with divination, I'm not going to get too hung up on trying to like argue that astrology is real and not just make believe. But there's some kind of thing about the archetypes of you see what I'm saying? That there's some kind of like archetype with Saturn and Neptune, where I think there's a kind of Saturn, unfortunately, can stand for a kind of limiting of the imagination. Like there could be as an astrological omen, if we look at Saturn and Neptune, you could say, what is the dynamic between the people that are true believers in this stuff versus people that would have a more skeptical point of view, that would just write it off as being a bunch of make believe, or a bunch of like funny business or something like that, right? And there's something about the there's a sort of like archetype with Neptune and the like if you I'm also playing this Elden Ring video game. I'm not gonna spend I feel a little bit embarrassed because I'm like, I don't know. I'm not really much of a gamer. I don't like. Apparently, some people put thousands and thousands of hours into a single video game. The fact that I've put like a couple hundred hours, I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm being a gamer, right? But there's still like this thing of like the computer simulation of a fantasy. Like you're just a nerd, but in this computer simulated fantasy, you get to be a knight in shining armor and save the princess. That's what most video games are like, right? When you had Uranus and Neptune conjunct in the 1990s, that was when we had the initial development of all the video game consoles, right? Of Zelda and, Mario and all the RPGs, all the fantasy video games. That's all the Uranus Neptune stuff, right? With Saturn Neptune, there's this kind of thing where it's like astrology. If you put astrology in this context, you could obviously have people that are like bored with mundane, ordinary life, and they want to run away from that escapism into a world of fantasy and archetypes, so they can slay the dragon and rescue the princess, and because that's more exciting than their boring real life. And it's also, you can also look at the current trends right now. Romantasy books are hugely popular, right? Oh, there's a huge, I just see, like, this is the kind of thing that's like, before, what used to be popular was stuff like The Hunger Games, teen dystopian fiction, or like there was that era of having when Twilight was really popular, right? There's my sister. Josie, what's a good romantasy book?
Well, good is, they're not good.
What's your recommendation?
Well, there's A Court of Thorn and Roses is the most popular.
A Court of Thorn and Roses. This is the era we're living in, right? People are basically...
But it's popular.
What am I getting at here is that there's different avenues to approach the same thing. One could be through literature choices, could be through video games, or it could be through, I like making electronic music. And there's one thing about electronic music has often had there's a struggle being into electronic music where the rock and roll aficionados don't take it seriously. Because from a rock and roll point of view, the idea of like a real band playing real music with guitar and drums and real instruments and singing live and all this kind of stuff. Like there was an age when, like, do you remember in the 90s or the 80s when you had like Milli Vanilli, and there's this huge controversy about these people who would perform lip syncing, and they're like, they're not even singing the music. They didn't even, or like they hired different people to do the singing, and these are just like posers lip syncing basically, right? There's some kind of attitude with like authenticity versus something that is like a fantasy or a fake. And also with like, there's a bias towards, let's say, sampling. They're like, you didn't even make that music. You just stole it and you put it in a loop. You took a perfectly good thing and you made it shitty, and now you're just rapping over it. Like there's this whole rock snobbery against rap music or pop music, things that use sampling, or also like the Fairlight, the original samplers. Like this idea that instead of paying for an orchestra, now you just have these canned cheap sounds that you're playing as samples. There's a whole bias towards this as being fake, synthesized, unauthentic, inorganic, a simulation, a fantasy. You know what I'm trying to say, right? This archetypally has to do with Neptune. And I think there's one of the things as astrologers that is I think a possible warning with all this is basically the Saturn and Neptune is in a square right now to the Sagittarius stellium. And the way I see it, regardless of whether you're into fantasy role-playing games, romantasy novels, or making techno music or electronic music. There's this whole kind of thing about being lost in the fantasy or the escapism but there's something about it where I'm gonna challenge you with something here. What if that is actually helpful? Like, what if it actually helps to have a something that you can play with that is not like that is either just a game, just a fantasy, or just a make-believe thing, or is not the full-on real, you're not maxing out the reality of the situation. You're just dinking around with some funny things in your own little corner, and you're not like what if that is actually helpful in some way, right? And what if there's this pressure that what if we say, oh, if you're doing that, that's just childish. You need to grow up. You need to get real. That what if there's actually some value in keeping that, and that there's there's something else about this. Sagittarius is a mutable sign, right? It is a sign, it has to do with being adaptable, being flexible, with changing. And one of the things that I've also known a lot of Pisces, I knew that I had a Pisces friend who was always trying to reinvent himself or whatever, right? And I think there could be a temptation to constantly trying to be keep what's working, throw out what isn't working, and with the pressure with the Saturn-Neptune, we got to get real, right? We got to forget all this fantasy stuff. We got to get real. Right? And there's a problem about this is that get real is also if you take the positive about that, it could be getting real is to be authentic rather than being fake, rather than being phony. And which leads me, I had recently discovered a song which I had never heard before in the genre of electronic music. I have to admit, I've been listening. It may have been listening to the radio and with a cassette recorder and recording things off the radio. It could have been way back when, as a millennial adolescent, is how I found about this particular artist, Green Velvet. Green Velvet, of course, a classic electro house producer. I never heard this song before. I found a Green Velvet song called Fake and Phony, and it's an amazing song because it uses a loop of somebody saying you don't have to be fake and phony, repeated and looped over and over and over and again. But there's something about the way that this is layered with the heavy techno beats, and there's something about that the sound of the synthesizer is fairly harsh and aggressive. And it's in such a way that it clashes with the vocal. It sort of competes in the same frequency range, if you see what I'm saying. And somehow by doing this, it creates this illusion. It creates an illusion, this is with Neptune. It creates an audio illusion where it's you're listening to the same thing looped over and over and over again, and it starts to not sound like what they're saying, and you start to hear it's also funny to read the comment section because you've got people saying interpreting as beefsteak, that beefsteak, rather than fake as beefsteak, or it also kind of sounds a little bit you don't have to be straight and horny, right? Or there's this kind of, but there's the more you listen to it, you just hear all these different things of this. You don't have to be fake and phony. 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 And there's something about that, which is there's the demand to be authentic as this hammering, trying to shake all the fakeness out of you. And there's this sort of you're under this pressure, external pressure to authenticize, but then in that sort of that starts to break down and become sort of an illusion in the song where it's you stop hearing this command to stop being fake and phony, and then you start hearing you don't have to be straight and horny, you don't eat beef steak or whatever, or beef steak and bologna or whatever. It's it starts to be this thing where there's a multiplicity of hallucination emerges out of it, where this could be saying anything, right? But the thing is, each thing that it's saying that isn't the name of the song is actually just you tripping out and hallucinating and getting lost in a delusion. And there's something about this where imagine a hallucinating, fantasizing world where you can just make believe reality to be whatever you want to be. It reminds me of two things. Philip K. Dick did a story about playing with dolls and doing drugs in the far future to basically. The whole idea is that when the outside world is too depressing, you just take a lot of drugs and hyper focus on your Barbie doll playhouse and pretend that is reality to block out all the things you don't like. But then there's this kind of thing about the rock and roll snob judgment of techno music as being. I have this kind of clash because I like Sonic Youth. I also like, I don't know, maybe Sonic Youth has changed their mind since could be a leftover attitude from years gone by, but Thurston Moore once criticized electronic music saying that it tends to be too plastic, right? And what I've noticed is that there's a certain archetypal animosity between the rockers and the electronic music scene, where the rockers are all about a certain grounded authenticity versus there's a hyperplasticity of electropop or techno or whatever. And to be honest, I'm not actually into stuff like, well, it leads very well into transgender stuff, gender fluidity, all this kind of stuff, which is a contentious issue. I'm not going to go there with it. But there is nonetheless this thing about it does play into it, obviously, where if you think about like transgenderism or drag, or also whether you only recognize two genders, or whether you see a whole multiplicity of like queer gender expression. Is the demand to be authentic also a demand to stop putting on the false image of however you're dressing up, and just, if you're a man, be a man. If you're a woman, be a woman. Be the real thing. You don't have to be fake and phony. You don't have to be fake and. But what if putting on like you are a hyper masculine? You're like, okay, I have calculated the formula for success. If I make myself this image, and I want to be successful on YouTube, if I become super plastic and then I mold myself into this Barbie doll Ken image that is highly marketable, then I'll be successful, right? But then there's this thing about the plasticity feels like the more things feel hyper plastic and you can just mold it into whatever you want. There doesn't feel like it has inherent reality to it, right? And there's something about that, like if you're playing a little dollhouse game separated from the real world, or if you're playing like with little plastic, like synthesizers or samplers sounds could be anything, that you're detached from dealing with real people and real musicians in your own, it starts to feel a little bit like autistic, right? There's this kind of like, then that is one thing that I'm kind of like, I have to admit I'm a little bit turned off about because of my own introverted hobbies, is that there's a certain kind of like, you feel kind of autistically cut off from the outside world in a world that is introverted and hyperplastic, and that the odd thing about this, I've been trying to do divinations around this, and there's something going on right now, how with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, that Pisces, I think, actually lends itself more to this sort of like sentimental introversion of just fantasy and nostalgia and dreamy and like and rather than trying to what if that is actually serves a purpose, and that by trying to like think about this, like if you have a day world and a night world. And if Pisces, a lot of people associate Pisces with dreams, right? Like, what if you like took away people's ability to dream, and like, what if dreaming provides us an escape from the concrete, rational, real world? And it's like, you can't dream anymore, you can't fantasize anymore, and you just have to be beat over the head by this is reality. And and then you have to be authentic. Don't be, it's like, don't dress up, don't put on a costume, we have to know this is really you. We have to know your true face. We have to unmask, unmasking the cult, like there's this obsession with unmasking people. Like, oh, these people were putting on like this whole the skeptical debunking culture, where it's like, oh, all these people were putting on a show, but we've apprehended them, we've unmasked them. We've revealed their plot, and we've exposed the true reality. We've saved all these people from being sucked into the delusional dream, right? And so, the real world has won, right? And it's in the real world where we make real changes, right? But this, in some way, like my whole, I don't know. It's actually it seems to me to be a danger. What I'm getting from trying to do divinations about all this is that there is actually some kind of grace in not feeling like you have to. You can keep a little place of like fantasy and play and of without having to like immanentize it totally to the hard reality of the real world, right? You can have this place where you're like, oh, well, I live my real day-to-day life, and then it allows me to a respite from that when I'm singing a song on guitar, I can make up a fictional character. It doesn't have to be like, I'm this person, I'm carrying this burden of my identity, and I'm going to sing this song about this person that I don't like, and it's going to be really serious because it's a real person and I really don't like that. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like, you want to create a fictional world to give you a bit of like relief from that, right? To give you a break, give yourself a break, right? Rather than taking everything so goddamn serious. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. There's a problem of like taking things too, like, I think I don't know, as a Sagittarius, I feel like I have the double body nature of the sign. I have part of me which wants to be goofy and playful and not take things very seriously, and then another part which takes things too seriously. And the thing about it is that, like, having a sort of a fantasy, a place where you can play, provides you a place to not take things so seriously, right? But then if you take that away and then make everything really serious, it's like you need to have it's not room to include both sides of life, and it could be entirely dangerous to take things too seriously, basically, right? And so I think there could be, I don't know, that's it is true that there's going to be this lengthy ongoing thing with Venus, the Sun, and Mars, and doing this whole movement through the zodiac until they get to Aries, where Saturn, and they're going to be this huge like Saturn-Neptune Aries with all this huge stellium. It's going to be a pretty intense year for astrology, and like I think like the best advice, at least where my head is at right now, is that it helps, like Saturn. It's like the planet that stands for a lead weight, right? It helps to defend whatever it is in your life that gives you a bit of levity over the situation, so you don't have to, like, the idea that, if you want to make it so that your ship floats, right? So that maybe if you offload you have to be able to differentiate between what is kind of like the dead weight of like heavy, like, oh, this, like, I have to carry around this burden of grief that like weighs me down, versus something that actually helps you to keep a little bit of levity, helps you to keep a bit of lightness. And because I think there's a problem in seeing the things that give you a bit of lightness and being a little bit of levity, of just being this like ineffectual plastic, like, oh, it's just it's just like, some like putting some glitter and you're like, it could be, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, for you in your little, you have your little cozy creative corner where you put some glitter and paste and like, you know, make a little collage or something like that. And it doesn't look like much, right? What I'm trying to say? But like in a world that if you have the ability to do that, you're one step above a world that takes everything goddamn way too seriously, right? And that if you're trying to like all hung up that what you're doing with your collaging has to be like a vision board where you're like, I'm going to create my dream life. I'm going to fucking manifest the world to be exactly what I want it to be. Like, it's like you're taking things too seriously. It helps to have like a playground where whatever you're making in your little like fantasy playground kind of like your little dollhouse plastic world doesn't have to fucking imitize itself exactly onto the real world in order for you to be happy, right? And that it actually could be more happy that you have the freedom that it doesn't have to do that, right? And so I'm trying to, I think that this is what's coming through anyways. I don't know. This is where my head is at today. This is what it's like right now with 4 planets in Sagittarius. Pretty soon Mars is going to be in Capricorn. Pretty soon Venus is going to be in Capricorn. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting 2026. Stay tuned for more videos about it. Thanks for watching.